The world behind barbed wire lives by its own cruel and unwritten laws. Thieves, robbers, murderers, and people who have long renounced the accepted norms of society end up there. The usual moral guidelines do not apply here. Only the iron will of the regime works here. The voice of the state, delivered through the courts, sounds like a sentence, and from then on, a person's life is completely subject to the internal rules of the colony. Correctional facilities do not forgive mistakes. The rules require unconditional compliance, and the slightest deviation from them can cost a prisoner their health, and sometimes their life. Particularly harsh conditions await those sentenced to life imprisonment. For such people, there are special regime prisons. They do not leave the walls of their building for decades. Even the rare occasions when they are allowed to leave their cells, they are blindfolded to prevent them from studying the territory and trying to memorize the route. People who end up here gradually cease to be part of the outside world. Years of solitude and constant control break the will of even the strongest. But it is not only men who become prisoners of the system. There are also women's colonies, where life also turns into an endless ordeal. Among the prisoners, there are many women who committed crimes in their youth and condemned themselves to long years behind bars. These are very young girls who ended up in prison at a time when they should have been living a full life, starting a family, and having children. Now they share gray barracks, hard labor, and endless internal rules, obeying orders where there is no place for femininity and freedom. Each new sentence handed down in the courtroom becomes a turning point for the defendant. From that moment on, their path most often leads to correctional facilities, places where a completely different life begins. The voice of the judge, speaking on behalf of the Russian Federation, becomes the last word of freedom. For the totality of crimes committed, the punishment of imprisonment is imposed. After these words, a person's fate changes irrevocably. The history of prisons goes back to ancient times. Archaeologists recently discovered one of the oldest places of imprisonment in Novgorod. Ancient prisoners were not held in stone buildings and barracks, but in a simple pit, about 3 meters deep and only 2 meters wide. Wooden bunks were set up at the bottom, and a primitive toilet served for natural needs. To protect prisoners from groundwater, the walls were reinforced with clay and lined with logs. There were no familiar locks, heavy iron doors, or bars, but this did not make life any easier for the prisoners in the ancient pit prisons. Imagine a hole in the ground, one part of which was used as a primitive toilet, and the other as benches on which the unfortunate prisoners ate and slept. Dampness, darkness, constant odors, and cramped conditions, that's what imprisonment meant several centuries ago. It was a real test, surviving in conditions where the earth itself became a home, a cell, and a grave. Modern prisons, of course, are completely different. They have everything that symbolizes not only punishment but also an attempt to preserve humanity in people. Prayer rooms where prisoners seek solace in faith, psychologists' offices, designed to make life behind bars a little easier, exercise yards, allowing inmates to see the sky, albeit through metal bars. There are even libraries. People read a lot in prisons. After all, books remain the only door to a past, lost life. Reading becomes a kind of salvation. You open the pages and for a few hours forget that you are in a world cut off from freedom. Before your eyes is a typical cell for life prisoners in the Black Dolphin, one of the most famous and heavily guarded colonies in Russia. Behind the massive iron door is another barrier, a metal grill, behind which you can see the tiny space of the cell. The floors are covered with wooden planks. The furniture is simple but clean. Everything looks extremely austere and functional. Belongings are laid out in their places. Outer clothing is neatly stored in a designated locker. The toilet and sink are tiled. The plumbing gleams with cleanliness. Everything is kept in perfect condition. Order truly reigns here, but this order is oppressive in its coldness and hopelessness. Prison is punishment, but not open mockery. Here, they do not try to mock the body, but they invariably break the spirit. After all, life imprisonment is not a few years that can be counted on the calendar. It is the rest of one's life spent in a closed cage, where even the window offers no view except for a piece of sky and metal bars. Every morning and every evening here is the same. Day after day turns into a gray, endless stream where time ceases to have meaning. That is why the debate over the death penalty continues to rage in society. Many Russians support its return, believing that execution is a just punishment for the most violent criminals. But those who think this way often do not even imagine what life imprisonment really means. Death is a moment. Life imprisonment is eternity within four walls. It is when your world shrinks to a few square meters of a cell and rare minutes of walking in a concrete box under a sky covered by bars. Convicts who are ready to commit the most terrible crimes do not think about such a prospect. For them, everything seems distant and unreal, and their actions sometimes border on madness. Now, at our request, one of the prisoners will be brought to the cell we just showed you. Special permission was obtained for this conversation, which is why it was allowed to be filmed. The guards lead him carefully, warning, "Water, be careful." Footsteps can be heard in the corridor, the metallic jingle of keys and the creak of the bars opening. A man appears before us. Karpykin Yevgeny Ivanovich, born in 1952. In the past, he was an ordinary rural resident, but his name has been forever inscribed on the list of the most dangerous criminals. His case shocked even seasoned investigators. While intoxicated, he committed a monstrous crime. He killed 3 people and attempted to kill 3 more. He did this out of hooliganism, dousing people with gasoline and setting them on fire with a lit match, turning an ordinary evening into a deadly trap. The investigation established that Karpykin had been harboring hatred and malice for a long time. He himself says, "It was not my right, I had no right to judge them. But at that moment, I did not realize it. So much hatred had accumulated inside me. On that fateful night, he went out into the yard and into the shed, where there was a canister of gasoline. His young wife and their guests were sitting on the porch, playing cards, laughing, and relaxing. Karpykin walked past them with a blank stare, went into the house, and returned with the canister. He doused everything around him and set it on fire. All hell broke loose. Those who managed to escape ran outside, engulfed in flames. But not everyone was able to save themselves. The victims were a woman named Bykorovka, her child, and a man who had come with them as a guest. The rest suffered severe burns but survived. It all happened because of jealousy. Karpykin was jealous of his wife and decided to destroy her along with the company she had invited. Thus, because of a single outburst of insane rage and alcohol, the lives of several people were cut short. Today, this man sits in front of the camera in a maximum security prison and tries to reflect on his fate. He says, "I ended up here. I had a wife, children, a retired mother. But my wife, despite everything, did not abandon me. She visits me and writes letters." His voice betrays a mixture of remorse and attempts at justification, but this does not make the crime any less monstrous. And this is just one example. In the neighboring cell is Kamishurid's Givi Otorivik, born in 1965. He committed an armed robbery by prior agreement. During this attack, he killed 2 people. Prone to escape, prone to attack, attempted to organize mass riots. These are the marks that appear in the personal files of many of the prisoners here. These words are dry and bureaucratic, but behind them lie terrible stories that are difficult to comprehend. Sometimes, when you look into the eyes of these people in a cramped cell, it becomes scary, because they are not somewhere in books or newspapers, they are here, nearby, and each of them carries blood and broken destinies on their shoulders. The names in the archive documents send a chill down your spine. One of them is Oleg Viktorovich Rilkov, born in 1966. His crimes are shocking in their monstrous cruelty. 37 raped underage girls, 3 of whom were killed in the most brutal way. This man is also listed as prone to escape. When he talks about his past, he tries to repent, to argue that, was it really me? But no matter how much he tries to justify himself, his words cannot drown out the horrific essence of what he has done. Here, within these walls, he tries to explain his past by blaming the streets and circumstances. But everyone understands perfectly well that behind every why, there are the tears of parents and broken children's lives. Another prisoner is Marat Mihailovich Buzaluksky, born in 1976. His crimes include a series of robberies and assaults committed with particular cynicism and premeditation. He used knives and firearms. He has killed 5 people. Each of them is not just a line in a criminal case, but someone's life, someone's family, someone's tragedy. And there are dozens like him here. Almost all prisoners in this institution are marked with one line, "Prone to escape." These are not empty words. That is why every movement here is a special operation. Convicts are accompanied by guards with dogs, and any step to the left or right will be met with an immediate response. They are blindfolded when taken outside the building. They are not allowed to raise their heads or look around. Here, prisoners are led in a special position called the cube. Their bodies bent forward, their hands behind their backs in handcuffs, their palms open. Any attempt to straighten up, turn around, or slow down is met with sharp commands that must be obeyed immediately. And yet it all seems to start with small things. Sometimes with a tattoo on a teenager's skin. For some, it's just a drawing, but in the criminal world, every tattoo is a symbol, a kind of passport that opens the doors to the criminal community and at the same time closes the way back. Music. The person who receives it is no longer just a person with a tattoo, but a bearer of a certain status, and the older he gets, the harder it is to give up this path. "How old are you?" they ask the skinny guy. 15. "What does that mean?" They nod at the drawing on his arm. You see, prison is not a school, and the prosecutor is not a teacher. Here, no one reads lectures, but immediately assigns a sentence. And yet, teenagers continue to show off, openly demonstrating their achievements and involvement in the criminal world. Even among the youngest girls today, you can find those who have already committed a terrible act, murder. They don't call their victims victims, they say the injured, as if trying to soften the reality. Here, for example, is Olga's story. She no longer has a mother. She killed her herself. "I couldn't take it anymore. I just didn't have the strength to fight her," the girl says quietly. "I turned to everyone, the police, my neighbors, my acquaintances. No one helped. My mother drank everything away. I ran around to people, borrowed money, asked my neighbors for a little money, bought food, brought it home, but it all went nowhere. I thought, it's better to sit here in prison than to go back to where no one hears me." These words sound frightening. Conscious, almost calm, even though they refer to the most terrible thing, matricide, the murder of one's mother. The girl was only 15 at the time, and the guy she calls her victim was 24. "What will you do when you are released?" asks the journalist. "First, I will erase my entire past. I will start my life over. Completely over. It will be a new life, in which everything will be different. I no longer want to return to where I was before. But it is difficult to return to a normal human life when you are branded a murderer. For many convicts, this burden proves to be unbearable, and the road back to society seems closed forever. Often, the only way to return to oneself, to find at least some hope and strength to live on, is through faith. That is why today, in many correctional facilities, more and more attention is being paid to the spiritual life of prisoners. The prison administration understands that a person deprived of faith and inner support becomes an embittered, withdrawn creature who lives only for hatred and malice. It is precisely in order to give them a chance for spiritual purification that churches began to be built in prisons. These are not just brick walls and domes with crosses. They are islands of hope where every prisoner can feel, at least for a moment, that they are not a criminal, but a human being. The chance to survive and rise above lies in repentance, in acknowledging guilt and attempting to redeem the soul. Only prayer and sincere appeal to God give these people the strength to resist the darkness that has accumulated in their hearts over the years. The temple becomes a symbol that even in the roughest and most embittered souls there remains a spark that can be rekindled. He who is love, the Almighty, will surely touch you with his forgiveness if you seek him, say the priests. And in this, a new understanding opens up for the prisoners. They may lose their freedom, but not their souls. Thus, shrines have appeared in various corners of the country, right behind barbed wire. A temple in honor of the icon of the Mother of God, softening of evil hearts, the temple of Saint Anastasia the Deliverer in the village of Partsa, the temple of Saint Sergius of Radenez, and the temple in the name of Saint Nicholas the Wonderworker in the village of Sosnovka in Mordovia. The latter was built in 2008 right at the junction of two camps, one of which is for life prisoners. There is a special atmosphere inside the temple. Here, during services, you can see prisoners standing to the right of the iconostasis. These are those who have been sentenced to life imprisonment. For them, participating in the service is a special reward, a rare opportunity to escape from the familiar hell of gray walls and strict regime. They come here not for the sake of a checkmark, but because they are looking for at least a drop of comfort, at least a grain of hope. After the service, the prisoners share their impressions, and many admit that it is here that they feel something like peace of mind for the first time in many years. One of the convicts presented the church with a small icon depicting Jesus Christ in prison, saying, "May he inspire you, because Christ was with you and remains with you always. Look to him, pray, and the Lord will surely have mercy." Another was given an icon of Saint Nicholas, the patron saint of travelers and prisoners, with the words, "May he protect you on all your paths in life, because even here, behind bars, we feel that we are not alone." Many admitted that with the arrival of faith and the appearance of these churches in the colonies, they felt a real connection with the spiritual world, which they had so lacked before. "Because my fellow countryman is Alexievich, and we work together somehow. Well, may Saint Nicholas bless you, your future service, and all the people with whom you will walk through life." I would also like to mention the head of the colony, Vladimir Ilyich Gonkiev, and say a special thank you to him for his work, for the fact that in these harsh conditions he remains a person who not only enforces the law, but also tries to give it a human face. Such people give a chance for correction, for awareness, for hope. It is no coincidence that it was here, on January 23, 2008, that an important event took place, the consecration of the church in the name of Saint Nicholas the Wonder Worker. On that day, the Divine Liturgy was performed by the Archbishop of Saransk and Mordovia. It was not just a religious ceremony, but a true symbol of unity. Convicts and staff, people on different sides of the law, suddenly found themselves part of one common spiritual space. For a few hours, the walls, bars, and differences in status disappeared. All of them, those serving their sentences and those guarding them, felt themselves part of a single earthly church, where there is a place for everyone. It can be said that if such temples, spiritual stops, reminders of the eternal, were more common in everyone's life, then many of the winding roads of fate would never lead us to dead ends. But, unfortunately, we go through life, stumbling, following our passions, and only when we are brought here, under the arches of the prison temple, do we begin to understand how important it was to stop earlier. But the road can never lead nowhere, even if it seems that all is lost. Every turn, every choice sooner or later leads us to a place where we have to look ourselves in the eye. Take, for example, the Yeksha Correctional Colony for minors. It is a special place, a special world where teenagers encounter the reality of prison for the first time. Here there is a common order, common discipline, common rules, but no common destiny. Everyone has their own destiny. Almost 100 pupils, that's the official name for these kids, although in reality they are prisoners. But the most frightening thing is that their crimes are not childish at all. Article 162 is robbery, Article 158 is theft, and Article 159 is fraud. Among them are those convicted of murder. These are teenagers aged 14 to 16, but they already have human lives, blood, and serious crimes behind them. Every year, about 150,000 crimes committed by children are registered in the country. And it is frightening to imagine how many of these teenagers do not fully realize what fate awaits those who are not stopped by prison, the pain of others, or their mother's tears. Do you see this tattoo on my arm? My mother's tears. A symbol of pain, loss, and the memory of the suffering of loved ones. But memory alone is often not enough to reform someone, especially if we are talking about a person who has already committed a serious, bloody crime. Tattoos in the prison world are a kind of mark of destiny, a code that can reveal a lot about a person. But no tattoo can bring back the lives of those who have died or remove the burden of guilt from those who have crossed the line. Think about it. Even the most tender words and images can carry a dark meaning. Today, terrible tropical hurricanes that destroy everything in their path are given tender female names. The same is true here. Behind the poetic name White Swan lies not beauty and freedom, but one of the darkest symbols of the Russian prison system. It is not a bird, but a special regime zone, a legendary colony for life prisoners. Many of those we see on the short walk behind bars silently walking in small steps across the concrete courtyard under the watchful eye of the guards, were originally sentenced to the highest punishment, the death penalty. But in 1996, Russia introduced a moratorium on executions, and instead of a bullet, these people received another, much longer and more painful sentence: life imprisonment. Here, in the Solikamsk colony, White Swan, they will remain until the end of their days. For them, there is no future beyond these walls. Only gray concrete, bars, cells, and silence filled with memories and the realization that there is no way out. And suddenly, among dozens of faceless figures in black robes, you unexpectedly notice a familiar face. It's like a return to the past. Sitting on a bench is a man we filmed 10 years ago. Andrei Fokhov was once the main figure in a high-profile case, sentenced to death. In the past, he was the leader of the Saransk criminal gang that held an entire region in fear. One of the prisoners in this cell is Andrei, convicted of a series of brutal murders. His life is now confined to 4 walls, and his fate is life imprisonment. When we asked him how long he had been here at the White Swan, he replied in a quiet, muffled voice, "Since 1999. Almost a quarter of a century behind bars. Time flows differently here, turning every day into a test." We asked if he remembers the past, and he replied, "I try not to remember. I remember my sins only to repent for them." But still, pressed by questions, he admitted, "Of course, I remember my parents, my daughter, my wife, my relatives. I pray for them every day." And at that moment, something alive and vulnerable flashed in his eyes, like a glimpse of the human part of him that still remained beneath the layers of prison life. We asked if his wife maintained any kind of relationship with him, if she wrote letters or sent messages. The answer was short and frightening: no. Andrei lost not only his freedom, but also everything that connected him to his past life: his wife, daughter, friends. For him, this became a second prison, a prison of memory from which there is no escape. "You say that you condemn your past life," we clarified. "But what kind of monstrous crimes did you have to commit to realize this only now?" To this he replied, "I had no fear of God. And without fear of God, you lose your fear of human authority." That's how it turned out. We looked at these people through the camera lens, and they looked at us, and suddenly we noticed tears in the corners of their eyes. It seemed that these people had long since forgotten how to cry, that nothing remained in their souls but a cold emptiness. But there were tears nonetheless. And if a person is capable of crying, it means that somewhere deep inside, something human is still alive. It means that all is not lost, and perhaps such people can still be saved. They were silent. There was a heavy silence in the cell. But their eyes screamed, not with their mouths, but with their souls, a scream of despair and pain that was louder than any words.